You've been lied to. Your mind was trained to believe love is pure, that beauty equals goodness, and that your desires lead you to happiness. But what if Plato tried to warn you that most women you chase are nothing but shadows, designed to enslave, not to love you? This video will expose the ancient truth that no one dared to tell you until now. In the world Plato envisioned, truth existed beyond the reach of the senses. What we see, hear, and feel are shadows of a deeper, eternal reality. This concept, his theory of forms, was not just abstract philosophy, it was a weapon for navigating the treacherous realms of politics, power, and personal relationships. In the context of women, Plato's warnings strike with cold precision. What many men chase is not the soul of a woman, the illusion she wears like a mask. Beauty, to Plato, was a pale reflection of a higher ideal. But to the undisciplined man, beauty becomes a tyrant. She speaks not with reason, but with sensation, enslaving the eyes, igniting the flesh, and silencing the mind. Most men do not fall in love, they fall under a spell. Their admiration is not for who a woman is, but for what she appears to be. And herein lies the trap, for the modern man, as in Plato's time, rarely distinguishes between the essence of a woman and the image she projects. The way she moves, the shape of her face, the softness of her voice, all these awaken desire. But desire is not truth, it is a storm, and in that storm, reason drowns. This illusion is not random, it is weaponized. A woman who understands the effect of her beauty, even if unconsciously, learns how to wield it. With a glance, she can manipulate. With silence, she can control. With a carefully timed smile, she can rewrite a man's judgment, making him betray his standards in favor of her presence. Plato feared this power, not because he despised women, but because he saw the fragility of men. The male psyche, especially one untrained in philosophy and self-governance, is like a city without walls, easily invaded, easily conquered. To desire beauty is not a sin, but to believe that beauty is virtue, that is the fatal mistake. The modern world, more than ever, worships appearances. Social media, fashion, filters, seduction techniques, these are tools in the arsenal of illusion. And the more external perfection a woman can display, the more power she gains over men who have abandoned inner discipline. What you admire may not even be real. The curve of her body, the smoothness of her skin, the shape of her lips, these can all be constructed, altered, manipulated. And yet, men fall to their knees, not for truth, but for surface. Plato's allegory of the cave offers a haunting parallel. Imagine a man chained in a cave, watching shadows dance on the wall, believing those shadows are reality. Now imagine that the shadow he sees is the silhouette of a woman, moving seductively, whispering promises of love, of affection, of meaning. The man believes in her, trusts her, worships her. But he does not know her. He cannot. He is in the dark, and what he sees is not the woman. It is the projection of his own longing. This is the tragedy of men who live by sight, not in sight. They pursue the shadow and forsake the soul. They build entire relationships on lust disguised as love. They invest years of their lives, fortunes, and even their identities into women who never had to show who they truly are. Because once a man is enchanted, he no longer demands truth. He becomes grateful just to remain close to the illusion. Plato would have called this spiritual slavery, and the chains are not forged by the woman, they are forged by the man himself. Every time he ignores a red flag, silences his intuition, or justifies bad behavior for the sake of maintaining beauty in his life, he adds another shackle. He chooses comfort over clarity, pleasure over principle, and while the woman may benefit from this dynamic, she is not necessarily to blame. The real failure lies in the man's inability to distinguish between what merely looks good and what is truly good. In the Platonic ideal, love is the pursuit of the soul's highest form. It is the hunger for something eternal, something wise, something just. But most modern relationships are built on pleasure and possession. They are driven not by harmony of minds, but by the chemistry of bodies. Plato would have considered this a descent into the animalistic, a betrayal of what makes us rational beings. Most women are not trained philosophers, and most men are not spiritual warriors. That creates a dynamic where surface dominates substance. The woman learns to lead with her image, and the man learns to follow it. Over time, this becomes a ritual. A game where she offers just enough allure to maintain control, he offers just enough devotion to remain in orbit. It is not love, it is theater. But the man doesn't see it. He believes he is in a profound relationship, that he has found someone worth suffering for. He calls his pain passion, his confusion mystery, and his submission love. What he cannot admit is that he is not seeing her clearly. He is seeing what he wants her to be. He is not loving a person. He is worshiping a dream sculpted from his own unmet needs and fantasies. Plato understood that desire is not simply an emotion. It is a force that, when unchecked, corrupts not only the mind, but the very foundation of a man's soul. The human soul, in Plato's vision, is divided into three parts: the rational, the spirited, and the appetitive. When properly ordered, reason governs the spirit and restrains the appetites. But lust, when allowed to rise without discipline, reverses this hierarchy. The lowest part of the soul, the beast within, takes the throne, and from that moment on, the man is no longer guided by wisdom but dragged by hunger. This is not just philosophical theory. It is the precise diagnosis of why so many men fall, not from external enemies, but from within themselves. Lust does not announce itself as a tyrant. It arrives as pleasure, as longing, as beauty. It whispers promises of connection, of intimacy, of ecstasy. But what it truly offers is bondage. A man overtaken by lust is a man who willingly dethrones his reason. He knows what is right, but chooses what is easy. He sees the cliff yet walks off it with a smile. Not because he is unaware, but because he is enchanted. The danger Plato identified is not in desire itself, but in what happens when desire is allowed to rule. Most men today confuse lust for love. They see a beautiful woman and believe that their attraction is noble, that their craving is a sign of destiny. But Plato would call this delusion. A woman's beauty is not inherently evil, but a man's failure to govern his reaction to it is a sign of inner decay. When the appetites rise, they drown the rational soul in noise. The man becomes frantic. He sacrifices, he pleads, he sacrifices his dignity, his purpose, his time, just to taste what he believes will complete him. Nothing external can ever complete what is broken within. Lust promises fullness but delivers emptiness. It sharpens craving, then deepens dissatisfaction. The more a man indulges, the more he feels the void inside growing. He becomes agitated, restless, addicted, not to the woman herself, to the escape she represents. She becomes a portal, not to truth, but to forgetfulness. In her presence, he forgets his mission. He forgets his standards. He forgets himself. This is not accidental. Lust, by nature, is parasitic. It feeds on clarity and replaces it with confusion. It feeds on discipline and replaces it with compulsion. The man who was once noble in thought, strategic in action, becomes erratic. He makes impulsive decisions. He lowers his guard. He entertains drama, manipulation, and emotional games that a sober mind would reject instantly. He loses the ability to say no, not because he lacks intelligence, but because he has surrendered the command center of his soul. Plato saw this as a spiritual sickness. When lust becomes the dominant force in a man's life, it does not just corrupt his relationships, it poisons his destiny. He becomes blind to betrayal, deaf to truth, and numb to the decay happening inside him. What he once valued, his craft, his goals, his honor, fades into the background. All that matters now is access to the woman. He may call this love, Plato would call it servitude. Not to the woman, but to his own appetites. This corruption does not happen overnight. It begins subtly, a glance held too long, a thought indulged in secrecy, a line crossed in silence. And with each compromise, the man loses a piece of himself. He tells himself it's just passion, that it's harmless. But slowly, his will is eroded. He begins to accept what once repulsed him. He tolerates disrespect, he chases what devalues him, and he excuses behavior that violates his core. The soul, once a palace, becomes a prison. Most women are not actively seeking to destroy men, but many understand, consciously or not, that their power lies not in logic, but in seduction. And seduction targets the appetites. It bypasses reason and enters through the flesh. A man untrained in discipline is an open door. He cannot discern flattery from sincerity, performance from authenticity. He does not know whether he is being loved or used, because he is too intoxicated to care. This is how empires fall, not through war, but through the seduction of their kings. The corruption of the soul through lust is the most silent kind of death. The man may still walk, talk, and function. Inside, he is fractured. His sense of self is scattered across moments of pleasure that never fulfilled him. And when the woman leaves, or worse, stays but withholds, he is left with nothing. No dignity, no direction, just a memory of who he used to be before he knelt before desire and called it love. Attraction is rarely innocent. Beneath every glance, every word laced with charm, every moment of magnetic tension, there is a battle unfolding, a silent war for power. Plato, ever the student of the human soul, knew this well. What most call falling in love is often the opening move in a game of control. He understood that relationships, especially those built on raw attraction, are rarely harmonious unions of equals. They are more often subtle hierarchies where one seeks to conquer and the other to surrender, sometimes willingly, sometimes unknowingly. The tragedy is that most men believe they are the hunters. They believe they are in control because they initiate, because they pursue, because they chase. But true power does not lie in the hands of the one who reaches. It lies in the hands of the one who is desired. The woman who understands her allure, consciously or by instinct, knows she does not need to chase. She only needs to position herself as the prize, and once the man begins to orbit her, the roles quietly reverse. The hunter becomes the hunted. The chooser becomes the chosen. Plato warned that unchecked desire distorts perception. A man in lust loses his ability to read the battlefield. He misinterprets manipulation as mystery, silence as sophistication, and rejection as challenge. He projects depth onto a surface that may be shallow, and he imagines virtue where there is only strategy. Many women do not wage war through direct conflict. They do it through subtlety, through withholding, through selective vulnerability, through offering just enough affection to keep the man guessing. This psychological unavailability creates a kind of addictive uncertainty. The man becomes obsessed, not because he is fulfilled, but because he is denied. In this dance of attraction, power is gained not by giving, by controlling the flow of attention. A woman who understands this need not even speak often. Her silence becomes a riddle. Her absence becomes a punishment. Her attention becomes a drug. And the more unpredictable she becomes, the more the man abandons logic and becomes emotionally dependent. Plato would call this a triumph of appetite over reason. The man tells himself he is choosing her, but in reality, he is reacting to her control. His decisions are no longer guided by principle, but by the hunger to regain her warmth, her validation, her presence. The essence of this power struggle is dominance disguised as love. What appears to be affection is often a test. The woman may not even be aware that she is testing, but she is. She is watching how far he bends, how quickly he yields, how much he is willing to compromise to maintain her favor. Every time the man caves to her whims, every time he sacrifices his boundaries to preserve her attention, she sees him more clearly. Not as a partner, but as someone she can dominate. And once the dynamic is set, it rarely reverses. Many relationships that begin in passion evolve into silent tyranny. The man, once confident and centered, becomes cautious and anxious. He walks on eggshells, careful not to say the wrong thing, not to upset her, not to lose the fragile connection. He becomes a servant, not out of love, but out of fear of losing her, fear of being alone, fear of confronting how far he has drifted from his former self. This is not what Plato envisioned as the union of souls. This is the corruption of love into a cold transaction of control. The woman, too, suffers in this dynamic, though differently. She does not respect the man she controls. She may enjoy the benefits of his attention, his gifts, his emotional labor, but in her eyes, he becomes smaller with each act of submission. She may test him more, provoke him more, or lose interest entirely. For even those who wield power crave resistance. A man who never asserts himself, who cannot say no, who cannot walk away, is not a partner but a pet, and no woman, regardless of what she says, truly admires a man who kneels too easily. Plato's philosophy teaches that a just soul governs its lower parts with reason. Likewise, a just relationship must be built on mutual respect and aligned values, not the tug of war of emotional dominance. But this is rare. Most relationships today are built on dynamics of control, often masked by romance. The man gives and gives, hoping to earn love, not realizing that love cannot be earned by servitude. It must be invited by strength, and strength is not loud. It is silent, grounded, immovable. This is why attraction, when left unchecked, becomes a contest. A struggle not to love, but to possess. Not to understand, but to conquer. Each word becomes a weapon, each silence a strategy. The game continues until one submits completely or walks away entirely. And in the middle of this game, the soul, the part Plato sought to elevate, gets forgotten. It becomes collateral damage in a war where no one truly wins, but both pretend to have what they want. Plato believed that the harmony of a society depends on the virtue of its individuals. When reason governs the soul and justice rules the city, order prevails. But when appetites rise above reason, when impulse becomes policy and pleasure becomes the highest good, civilization begins its silent collapse. This collapse does not come with war drums or violent revolts. It comes wrapped in velvet. It comes when virtue is no longer desirable and discipline is replaced by indulgence. It comes when men are no longer men, but shadows pulled by invisible strings. It comes when the influence of unchecked femininity overrules masculine principle. Plato saw the feminine not as evil, but as powerful. And like all power, when left unbalanced, it corrupts. In his time, the masculine virtue was defined by order, clarity, courage, and self-mastery. These were not just traits. They were pillars that held up families, cities, entire civilizations. The role of the masculine was not merely to provide or to protect. It was to lead with moral vision. But what happens when the masculine no longer leads, when it follows? What happens when the soul of a man is shaped not by philosophy, but by the fluctuating moods of attraction? In modern times, men have been subtly conditioned to abandon their own virtues to secure affection, attention, and approval. A man now measures his worth by how desired he is, how obedient he can become to win favor, how much of his strength he's willing to discard to appear less threatening, more palatable. The influence of feminine approval has become the compass by which many men steer their lives. But a man who lives for approval does not live at all. He survives in fragments, constantly negotiating between his desires and the expectations set by those he fears to disappoint. In a world ruled by appearances, it is no longer reason that defines value, but perception. Women possessing an innate understanding of the social currency of image adapt more fluidly to this world of illusion. They learn early how to maneuver through charm, how to manipulate perception, how to present themselves as what men want rather than what they are. Men, in turn, react, not with discernment, but with surrender. They sacrifice principle for pleasure, wisdom for admiration, truth for acceptance. They imitate what is praised and silence what is ridiculed. In doing so, they become actors in someone else's play rather than authors of their own path. The influence of the feminine becomes most dangerous not when it is obvious, when it is subtle, when it comes not in demands, but in suggestions, not in orders, but in expectations. A man might change the way he speaks, thinks, even what he believes, not because he is coerced, but because he wishes to be more agreeable. In seeking peace, he wages war against his own nature. He trims the parts of himself that seem too much, too cold, too firm. But firmness is the very structure of virtue. It is what keeps desire in check. It is what holds a family together. It is what withstands chaos. When that firmness is gone, what remains is not peace. It is compliance. It is the illusion of harmony resting on the decay of truth. The modern man is surrounded by voices that celebrate softness, emotionality, and constant validation. These are not inherently negative qualities, but when they become the standard by which men are judged, they become tools of submission. A man who cannot stand in solitude, who fears rejection more than dishonor, is a man who will bend to any pressure. He will mistake gentleness for goodness, seduction for love, appeasement for virtue. Plato would see such a man as lost, not evil, but misguided. His soul is no longer guided by the sun of reason, but by the flickering candle of public opinion, most often shaped by the desires of the very women he seeks to please. In the Republic, Plato warned against the rise of a democratic soul, a soul ruled by desires and the tyranny of the majority. Today, that tyranny does not come from crowds in the streets, but from quiet influencers, from beautiful faces on screens, from subtle shifts in relationship dynamics where the masculine virtue is slowly eroded. The collapse begins when men no longer question what they obey, when they internalize feminine moods as moral commands, when they accept that being desirable is more important than being virtuous. In the end, the downfall of a society is not always external. Sometimes it begins in the heart of its men, when they exchange their swords for smiles, their reason for romance, their vision for validation. Plato knew that no city, no soul, no civilization could survive if its guardians fell asleep, intoxicated by the very pleasures they were meant to guard against. When the feminine is unchecked, when the masculine forgets its sacred role, not to dominate, but to anchor, virtue crumbles quietly under the weight of seduction and surrender. Plato's warning was never directed at women alone. It was aimed at men who forget themselves in the presence of beauty, pleasure, and desire. He spoke to the collapse that begins not in cities but in souls. The truth is uncomfortable. Most men are not destroyed by enemies. They are undone by what they chase, by what they worship without understanding. They fall not on battlefields, but in bedrooms, not from violence, but from submission masked as love. A man who cannot govern his lust will be governed by it. A man who cannot see the power games woven into attraction will be used by them. A man who abandons his virtue to please, to be chosen, to be adored, will eventually lose not only his dignity but his direction in life. And a society full of such men, bent, hollow, afraid to speak truth, desperate to be liked, cannot produce greatness. It cannot produce order. It cannot survive. This is not a call to war against women. It is a call to war against weakness, against the impulse to kneel when you should walk away, against the tendency to surrender your reason for temporary warmth. Women have their nature, and their nature is neither enemy nor savior. But it is powerful, and power, if not respected, corrupts. Plato's ancient wisdom remains urgent today. If you wish to be a master of your life, you must first be a master of your soul. Govern your desires, or they will govern you. Honor your virtue, or it will be traded for attention. Know your value, or it will be determined by those who see you only as a tool. The world will not warn you. It will seduce you. And if you refuse to listen, if you refuse to awaken, you will not fall with a scream. You will fall in silence, smiling, thinking you have won.